When 10-year-old Lila Hale grabbed the microphone at her mother's charity gala and asked 5 wealthy suitors to compete for the chance to be her new father, she never expected to fall for the janitor cleaning up their mess. What happened next would shake the foundations of high society and prove that sometimes the most powerful choice is choosing love over status. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story and comment below with your city so I can see how far this tale of unexpected love has traveled around the world. Part 1. The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Victoria Hale adjusted her diamond necklace one final time. The annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala was more than just another charity event. It was her stage, her moment to shine as both a successful CEO and a devoted single mother. At 34, Victoria had built an empire from scratch, turning a small tech startup into a multinational corporation worth over $2 billion. Tonight, she would announce her company's largest charitable donation to date. "Mommy, do I really have to wear this dress?" Lila's voice carried a hint of rebellion as she tugged at the designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Victoria knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from the silk fabric. "Just for tonight, sweetheart. After the speeches, we can go home and you can change into your pajamas." Lila nodded reluctantly, her dark curls bouncing as she surveyed the room filled with the city's elite. At 10 years old, she possessed an unsettling wisdom that often caught adults off guard. Tonight, that wisdom would change everything. The evening began like countless others Victoria had attended. She glided through conversations about market trends, made polite small talk about vacation homes in the Hamptons, and gracefully deflected the usual questions about her love life. As the city's most eligible bachelorette, and one of its most powerful business leaders, Victoria had grown accustomed to the constant speculation about when she might settle down again. Victoria, darling. The voice belonged to Margaret Thornfield, the foundation's board chair, and one of the city's most influential socialites. "You look absolutely radiant tonight, and little Lila is growing up so fast." "Thank you, Margaret. She's definitely not little anymore," Victoria replied, glancing around for her daughter, who had been by her side just moments before. "Speaking of which," Margaret lowered her voice conspiratorially, "I've been meaning to ask, have you given any more thought to our conversation about suitable companions? There are several distinguished gentlemen here tonight who would be absolutely perfect for someone of your caliber." Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The suitable companions conversation had become a recurring theme among her social circle, as if her success somehow made her incomplete without a man to validate it. "I appreciate your concern, Margaret, but Lila and I are doing just fine on our own." "Of course, dear, but think of the child. She needs a father figure, someone to provide stability and guidance. And frankly, at your age and in your position, options won't remain limitless forever." Before Victoria could respond, the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. She excused herself and made her way toward the stage, scanning the crowd for Lila. Her daughter was nowhere to be seen, which sent a familiar flutter of maternal anxiety through her chest. The foundation's president took the microphone first, delivering the standard welcome and overview of the organization's accomplishments. Victoria half listened, her eyes still searching for Lila's small figure among the sea of evening gowns and tuxedos. Finally, she spotted her daughter near the stage, standing remarkably still for a 10-year-old at a formal event. "And now," the president's voice boomed across the ballroom, "please welcome our evening's keynote speaker and the Foundation's most generous supporter, Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Industries." Applause filled the room as Victoria made her way to the stage, her confidence returning with each step. This was her element, speaking to crowds, commanding attention, inspiring action. She had delivered this type of speech dozens of times, and tonight would be no different. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this important cause. She began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. When I started Hale Industries 15 years ago, I had a vision of using technology not just to generate profit, but to create positive change in our communities. The audience nodded appreciatively as Victoria outlined her company's latest philanthropic initiatives. She spoke about education programs, technology grants for underserved schools, and scholarship funds for deserving students. It was a well-rehearsed presentation delivered with the polish of someone who had built her career on convincing others to believe in her vision. Which is why tonight, Victoria continued building toward her announcement. I'm proud to pledge $5 million to expand the Children's Hope Foundation's programs citywide. The applause was thunderous, cameras flashed, and Victoria felt the familiar rush of accomplishment that came with making a significant impact. She was just beginning to acknowledge the standing ovation when she noticed movement at the edge of the stage. Lila had somehow made her way past the security personnel and was walking determinedly toward the microphone. Victoria's public speaking experience had prepared her for many scenarios, but not for her 10-year-old daughter hijacking her moment in the spotlight. "Sweetheart, what are you?" Victoria began, but Lila had already reached for the microphone with surprising determination. "Excuse me." Lila's voice carried clearly through the sound system, causing the applause to die away abruptly. "I have something important to say." The ballroom fell silent. Victoria stood frozen, unsure whether to gently guide her daughter away from the microphone or let this unexpected moment play out. The cameras that had been focused on her charitable announcement now turned toward the small girl in the expensive dress who had commanded the attentions of the city's most powerful people. "My name is Lila Hale, and I'm 10 years old." She began displaying a poise that would have been impressive in an adult, let alone a child. "My mom just promised to give away $5 million to help other kids, which is really nice. But I have a question for all the grown-ups here tonight." Victoria felt her heart rate accelerate. Lila had always been precocious, but this level of public speaking was entirely new territory. The audience seemed equally transfixed, leaning forward to hear what the CEO's daughter had to say. "My question is about fathers." Lila continued, her young voice carrying a weight that made several people in the audience shift uncomfortably. "All my friends at school have dads. Some of them are divorced and have 2 dads or stepdads or whatever. But me, I've never had a dad I actually liked." A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face as she realized where this was heading, but she remained rooted to the spot, unable to intervene without creating an even bigger scene. "So I was thinking," Lila said, warming to her topic. "Since my mom is so good at finding solutions to problems, maybe she could find a solution to this one too. Maybe we could find me a dad who's actually worth having around." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Victoria could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could practically hear the mental notes being taken by journalists and society bloggers. This was either going to be a heartwarming moment that would be shared across social media, or a public relations disaster that would follow her family for years. "But here's the thing," Lila continued, seemingly oblivious to the stunned expressions surrounding her. "I don't want just any dad. I want one who actually cares about me, not just about my mom's money or her company. So I have a proposition." Victoria finally found her voice. "Lila, sweetheart, maybe we should—" "It's okay, Mom," Lila said, turning to face her mother with a smile that was both innocent and surprisingly calculating. "I've thought this through. I want to choose my own dad, but I need some options. So here's what I'm thinking. What if we found 5 really good men, and I got to spend time with each of them, and then I could pick the one who would be the best dad for me and the best partner for Mom? The audience was no longer just listening. They were captivated. Victoria could see phones being pulled out discreetly, social media posts being crafted in real time. Margaret Thornfield looked like she was about to faint, whether from shock or excitement was unclear. I know this sounds weird, Lila admitted, but think about it. When you're hiring someone for an important job, you interview lots of people first, right? And what's more important than being someone's dad? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria realized that her daughter's unconventional logic was actually resonating with people. In a room full of business leaders who made calculated decisions based on careful evaluation of options, Lila's proposal had a strange kind of sense to it. So, Lila said, building to her conclusion, with the timing of a seasoned performer, if there are any men here tonight who think they might want to apply for the job of being my dad, please raise your hand. Victoria watched in amazement as several hands actually went up around the room. Some belonged to men she recognized, successful lawyers, doctors, and business executives who moved in her social circles. Others were strangers, men who had perhaps come as someone's guest, and now found themselves unexpectedly participating in the most unusual job interview of their lives. Lila, Victoria finally managed to say, This is a very creative idea, but maybe we should discuss it privately. No, Mom, Lila said firmly, displaying a stubbornness that Victoria recognized as inherited from herself. I've been thinking about this for a really long time, and I think if we're going to do this, we should do it right, with rules and everything. The audience was now fully engaged, some people actually calling out questions or suggestions. Victoria realized that her daughter had somehow turned a charity gala into an interactive event, and there was no graceful way to end it without looking like she was dismissing her daughter's feelings in front of hundreds of people. What kind of rules? Victoria asked, deciding that playing along might be the least damaging option at this point. Lila's face lit up with triumph. Well, first they have to be nice to both of us, not just you. Second, they have to actually like kids, not just pretend to. Third, they have to have real jobs and be responsible grown-ups. And fourth, she paused dramatically, they have to pass a test. What kind of test? Someone called out from the audience. I haven't figured that out yet, Lila admitted with refreshing honesty. But I'll know it when I see it. Sometimes the most important things about people don't show up until there's a real problem to solve. Victoria felt a mix of pride and terror as she watched her daughter command the room with such confidence. Where had this poise come from, and how was she going to explain this to her board of directors? So, Lila continued, who wants to be considered for the position of Lila Hale's new dad? More hands went up this time, including some from men Victoria knew professionally. She could see the wheels turning in their heads. An association with her family would certainly be beneficial for their careers, and many of them had probably already calculated the social and business advantages of such a connection. This is wonderful. Margaret Thornfield had recovered from her shock and was now beaming as if she had orchestrated the entire event. What an innovative approach to modern romance, Victoria. You must be so proud of Lila's initiative. Victoria managed a smile that she hoped looked more confident than she felt. She's certainly unique. So it's settled then, Lila announced. My mom and I will meet with the candidates and I'll make my decision. But remember, she added, her voice carrying a note of warning that seemed far too mature for her years. I'm pretty good at telling when people are being fake. So if you're not serious about this, please don't waste our time. As the evening wound down, Victoria found herself surrounded by well-wishers, curious onlookers, and several men who were apparently serious about their candidacy for fatherhood. The charitable donation that was supposed to be the evening's headline had been completely overshadowed by her daughter's impromptu announcement. Mrs. Hale, a distinguished man in his early 40s, approached with a business card extended. James Wellington, cardiac surgeon at Metropolitan Hospital. I wanted to express my interest in meeting with you and Lila. I think what she did tonight shows remarkable maturity and self-awareness. Victoria accepted the card, still feeling like she was living in some alternate reality. Dr. Wellington, I appreciate your interest. I'm still processing what exactly happened here tonight. Of course. But if I may say so, Lila's approach is actually quite brilliant. She's essentially created a structured evaluation process for one of life's most important decisions. It's really quite impressive for someone her age. Before Victoria could respond, another man joined their conversation. Marcus Chen, attorney with Peterson and Associates. I couldn't help but overhear, and I wanted to add my name to the list as well. I have extensive experience with family law, and I think I could bring a unique perspective to your daughter's selection process. As more potential candidates introduced themselves throughout the evening, Victoria began to realize that Lila's spontaneous announcement had set something in motion that couldn't easily be stopped. The story would be in the society pages tomorrow, probably trending on social media by midnight, and expectations had been set that would be difficult to manage. Mom! Lila appeared at her side as the crowd began to thin. Are you mad at me? Victoria looked down at her daughter's upturned face, seeing both worry and hope in her dark eyes. How could she be angry at a child who had just publicly expressed her desire for a complete family, even if the method had been unconventional, to say the least? I'm not mad, sweetheart. I'm just surprised. This is a very big decision, and I wish we had talked about it privately first. But would you have listened? Lila asked with devastating directness. Really listened? Or would you have just said we were fine the way we are and changed the subject? Victoria felt the truth of that question settle uncomfortably in her chest. She had become so focused on proving that she could handle everything alone that she had perhaps missed some important signals about what her daughter actually needed. You make a good point, Victoria admitted. But sweetheart, finding the right person to join our family is more complicated than interviewing job candidates. It's about feelings and compatibility and that's exactly why I want to test them, Lila interrupted. Anyone can be nice for one dinner, but I want to see how they act when things go wrong, or when I'm being annoying, or when you're stressed about work. I want to see if they're real. As they made their way toward the exit, Victoria reflected on her daughter's words. Despite the unconventional delivery, Lila's logic was sound. Most relationships failed not because people couldn't be charming during courtship, but because they couldn't handle the reality of daily life together. So what happens now? Victoria asked as their driver pulled up to the curb. Now we interview the candidates, Lila said matter-of-factly. But Mom, I want to choose based on who's best for our family, not who looks best in a newspaper article. Promise me you'll remember that. Victoria helped her daughter into the car, her mind already racing through the implications of the evening's events. She had built her career on calculated risks and strategic decisions, but this felt like stepping into uncharted territory, where the stakes were her daughter's happiness and their family's future. I promise, she said finally. But Lila, next time you want to make a major life announcement, maybe we could discuss it beforehand. Lila grinned, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 10-year-old she was. Where's the fun in that, Mom? As their car pulled away from the hotel, Victoria watched the city lights blur past the window and wondered what she had gotten them into. In less than an hour, her daughter had transformed a routine charity event into a very public search for a father figure, complete with multiple candidates and promised evaluations. The rational part of her mind was already calculating damage control strategies and public relations responses. But another part, the part that remembered being 10 years old and wishing for things that seemed impossible, was quietly impressed by her daughter's boldness and clarity of purpose. "Mom." Lila's voice was softer now, tired from the excitement of the evening. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think any of them will actually be good enough for us?" Victoria reached over and took her daughter's hand, surprised by how small it still felt, despite all the grown-up wisdom Lila had displayed tonight. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I think we're about to find out." As they drove through the quiet streets toward home, Victoria realized that her carefully controlled life was about to become a great deal more complicated. But looking at her daughter's peaceful expression in the dim light of the car, she found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, complicated might be exactly what they needed. The evening that was supposed to showcase her charitable giving had instead revealed her daughter's deepest wish, and now the whole city would be watching to see how the story unfolded. Victoria Hale, who had built an empire on her ability to predict outcomes and control variables, was about to discover that the most important decisions in life often required a leap of faith into the unknown. And tomorrow, the interviews would begin. The next morning arrived with the persistence of a headache and the urgency of a breaking news alert. Victoria's phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. with calls from reporters, friends, and business associates who had either attended the gala or seen the footage that was now circulating across every social media platform. The hashtag #DadInterview was trending nationally, and Victoria found herself simultaneously proud of her daughter's viral moment and terrified of its implications. "Mom, we're famous," Lila announced cheerfully as she bounded into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, but already scrolling through Victoria's tablet. "Look, there are memes about me. This one says, 'When you're 10, but your dating strategy is better than most adults.'" Victoria set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Lila, about last night, we need to establish some ground rules before this gets any more out of hand." "It's not out of hand," Lila protested. "It's working exactly like I planned. We already have 5 serious candidates, and Mrs. Patterson from next door called to say her nephew is flying in from Seattle because he thinks I'm exactly the kind of kid who deserves a great dad. See, people get it." Before Victoria could respond, her assistant Rachel burst through the front door with an armload of newspapers and a look of barely controlled panic. "Victoria, thank God you're here. The phones at the office haven't stopped ringing since the first news report aired at 5 a.m. We've got interview requests from Good Morning America, Ellen, and at least 12 local news stations. The Times wants to do a feature story about modern family dynamics, and oh my God, is that Lila, honey? You broke the internet." Lila beamed with satisfaction, while Victoria felt the walls of her carefully ordered life closing in around her. "Rachel, please tell me my board meeting this afternoon has been postponed due to the media circus." Actually, that's the good news. Richard Evans called an emergency session for 10 a.m. He wants to discuss the situation and its potential impact on the company's reputation. Victoria's stomach dropped. Richard Evans was the most traditional and conservative member of her board, a 60-year-old investment banker who had never quite accepted that a single mother could effectively run a major corporation. If he was calling emergency meetings, it meant he saw blood in the water. "Mom, who's Richard Evans?" Lila asked, picking up on the tension in the room. "He's a man who thinks families should only look one specific way," Victoria replied carefully. "And he's never been particularly supportive of our family structure." "Well, then he's definitely not dad material," Lila declared with finality. See how easy this is. We're already eliminating bad candidates. Victoria almost smiled despite her mounting anxiety. Her daughter's logic was unassailable even if her timing was catastrophic. Over the next 2 hours, Victoria fielded calls from 3 different public relations firms, declined 7 interview requests, and reviewed the initial batch of applications that had somehow already arrived at her office. The men who had raised their hands at the gala were apparently taking this seriously, submitting formal letters of interest, along with references, background checks, and in one case a professionally produced video introduction. Dr. James Wellington submitted a 3-page essay about his philosophy on child development. Rachel reported scrolling through the emails on her laptop. And Marcus Chen included character references from his last 3 romantic relationships, which is either very confident or slightly concerning. What about the others? Victoria asked, though part of her still couldn't believe she was having this conversation. Let's see. David Rodriguez, who owns that chain of family restaurants downtown, included photos of himself coaching Little League and a letter from his grandmother vouching for his character. Christopher Blake, the venture capitalist, sent his financial statements and a portfolio of his charitable contributions. And then there's this interesting one. Rachel paused, frowning at her screen. What? Victoria prompted. Well, there's a 6th application that came in this morning, but it's different. No professional references, no financial documents. Just a handwritten letter and a photo of him with what looks like his son at a science fair. Victoria felt her curiosity pique despite herself. What does the letter say? It's from someone named Daniel Brooks. He says he works maintenance at the Meridian building downtown. That's where your offices are, right? He writes that he saw the news coverage and wanted to apply not because he thinks he deserves consideration, but because he thinks Lila deserves to have her request taken seriously by someone who actually understands what it means to be a parent. Something about that struck Victoria as fundamentally different from the other applications, which had all focused on the applicant's qualifications and achievements. This man was focusing on Lila's needs instead of his own credentials. Mom, Lila said, looking up from where she had been quietly listening, I want to meet that one first. Sweetheart, we don't know anything about him. The other candidates have professional backgrounds references. Exactly, Lila interrupted. They have all the stuff that looks good on paper. But this Daniel person is thinking about what I need, not about impressing you. That's different. Victoria had to admit her daughter had a point, though the practical side of her mind was already calculating the risks of getting involved with someone whose background she couldn't easily verify. Her phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Richard Evans, and Victoria's chest tightened with anticipation. Richard, good morning. Victoria, I trust you've seen the coverage of last night's spectacle. His voice carried the disapproval of someone who had never forgiven the world for changing around him. If by spectacle you mean my daughter expressing her feelings about family in a public forum, then yes, I've seen it. This is precisely the kind of circus atmosphere that concerns our investors. A CEO who allows her personal life to become entertainment news raises serious questions about judgment and professional priorities. Victoria felt her jaw clench. My daughter made an unplanned statement. I hardly think that reflects on my ability to run a company. Perhaps not directly, but the fact that you're apparently planning to follow through with this dating show nonsense certainly does. Victoria, you need to shut this down immediately and issue a statement that last night was a child's innocent mistake that won't be repeated. And if I choose not to do that, the silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to make Victoria's pulse quicken. Then we'll need to seriously discuss whether your personal choices are compatible with your professional responsibilities. The board meeting this morning will address exactly that question. After he hung up, Victoria stood in her kitchen, feeling the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. She could protect her career by dismissing her daughter's very public request as a childish whim, or she could honor Lila's feelings and potentially face a board revolt that could cost her everything she had built. "Mom," Lila's voice was smaller now, uncertain. "Are you in trouble because of what I did?" Victoria looked at her daughter's worried face and felt something shift inside her chest. When had she become the kind of person who would consider breaking her child's heart to protect a business relationship? "No, sweetheart. I'm not in trouble. But some people think we should pretend last night didn't happen. But it did happen. And I meant what I said." Lila's voice grew stronger again. "I want a dad who actually wants to be my dad, not someone who just wants to marry my mom for her money or her company. Why is that so wrong?" Victoria knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes, seeing her own determination reflected there. "It's not wrong at all. And you know what, we're going to do this exactly the way you want to. Starting with Daniel Brooks." The decision to meet with Daniel first turned out to be more complicated than Victoria had anticipated. Rachel's attempts to reach him through the Meridian Buildings management company had been unsuccessful. Apparently, maintenance staff didn't have individual contact information readily available, and the building's main office was being unhelpfully bureaucratic about passing along messages. "This is ridiculous," Victoria muttered as she rode the elevator up to her office later that morning. "I can arrange meetings with heads of state, but I can't figure out how to contact someone who works in my own building." The irony wasn't lost on her that she had spent years walking past maintenance workers without really seeing them, and now she was actively seeking one out. It was an uncomfortable reminder of how insulated her world had become. Her discomfort deepened when she arrived at her office to find 3 board members already waiting in the conference room 40 minutes early for their emergency meeting. Richard Evans sat at the head of the table with the satisfied expression of someone who had spent the morning building a coalition, while Patricia Newman and James Morrison flanked him with carefully neutral faces that didn't quite hide their concern. "Victoria, glad you could make it," Richard said with false warmth. "We thought it might be helpful to have an informal discussion before the full board arrives." Victoria took her seat at the opposite end of the table, noting how the arrangement made her feel like she was facing a tribunal. "I appreciate everyone's concern, but I think we may be overreacting to what was essentially a 10-year-old expressing her feelings." "It's not about her feelings," Patricia interjected, her voice gentler than Richard's, but no less serious. "It's about the potential ramifications. Our stock price dipped 2 points this morning on speculation about leadership instability. Investors are concerned about your judgment." "My judgment?" Victoria felt her professional composure slipping. "My judgment built this company from nothing into a $2 billion enterprise. One evening of unexpected personal publicity hardly erases 15 years of consistent performance." "No one's questioning your professional accomplishments," James said diplomatically. "But leadership requires more than just business acumen. It requires the appearance of stability and sound decision-making in all areas of life." Victoria realized they had already made up their minds before she walked into the room. This wasn't a discussion. It was an intervention designed to pressure her into compliance. "So what exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Richard leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering a generous offer. "Issue a statement today explaining that last night was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Say that you've reconsidered and that you are not actually planning to pursue this publicity stunt. Focus on your role as a business leader rather than as entertainment." "And what about my role as a mother?" "Your role as a mother is to make decisions that are in your child's best interests," Patricia said firmly. Is it really in Lila's best interests to have her private family matters played out in public? To have her choice of father figure become a media circus? The question hit closer to home than Victoria cared to admit. She had been so focused on not disappointing Lila that she hadn't fully considered the potential negative consequences of all the attention. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course," Richard agreed. "But Victoria, the full board meeting is in 30 minutes and they'll expect a decision. I'd hate to see this situation force us into a vote of no confidence." The threat was delivered with a smile, but it was unmistakably a threat nonetheless. Victoria had faced hostile takeover attempts and competitive challenges that had threatened her company, but she had never felt her leadership position be quite so directly challenged by her own board. After the informal meeting ended and the board members filed out to wait for the official session, Victoria found herself alone in the conference room, staring out at the city skyline and trying to untangle her competing priorities. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see people moving through their daily routines 40 stories below, and she wondered how many of them were facing impossible choices between their professional and personal lives. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Daniel Brooks is here. Building security found him on his lunch break, and he came up immediately. Should I bring him to your office or wait until after your board meeting?" Victoria stared at the message, feeling like the universe was presenting her with a moment of truth. She could go into that board meeting, capitulate to Richard's demands, and protect her career by sacrificing her daughter's publicly stated wishes. Or she could honor her promise to Lila and deal with whatever professional consequences emerged. She typed back, "Bring him to my office now." 5 minutes later, Victoria found herself face to face with Daniel Brooks, and her first thought was that he looked nothing like the polished executives who typically crossed her path. He was probably in his late 30s, with work-worn hands, and the kind of genuine nervousness that came from being outside his usual environment. His maintenance uniform had been replaced by clean jeans and a button-down shirt, but he still looked like exactly what he was, a working-class father who was way out of his league, but determined to be taken seriously. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for seeing me," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor that he was clearly trying to control. "I know this is probably the strangest job interview you've ever conducted. Please call me Victoria, and yes, this is definitely a first for me." She gestured for him to sit in one of the chairs across from her desk, noting how his eyes took in the panoramic city view and expensive furnishings without showing either intimidation or calculation. "I have to ask," Victoria continued, "what made you decide to apply? This whole situation must seem pretty surreal from the outside." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer, with the care of someone who understood that words mattered. "My son Ethan is 8, he said finally. "He lost his mom 3 years ago, and since then it's just been the two of us figuring things out. When I saw your daughter on the news last night asking for a dad who would actually care about her, I recognized something in her voice." "What did you recognize?" "The sound of a kid who's tired of adults making decisions about her life without really listening to what she needs." Daniel's voice grew more confident as he talked about something he clearly understood. "Ethan went through a phase where he kept asking why other kids had moms, and he didn't. And I realized that all my explanations about how we were fine, just the two of us, weren't actually answering his real question." Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. What was his real question? Whether he was worth fighting for. Whether someone would choose to love him, not just end up responsible for him. Daniel met her eyes directly. "I think that's what your daughter is really asking too." The insight was so accurate and so simply stated that Victoria had to take a moment to process it. She had spent months assuming that she and Lila were perfectly content as a two-person family, But Daniel had identified something she had missed entirely. "You said in your letter that you understand what it means to be a parent," Victoria said. "What did you mean by that?" "I meant that being a parent isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about showing up every day and putting your kids' needs ahead of your own comfort. It's about listening when they tell you something's wrong, even if you don't want to hear it." "And you think I haven't been doing that?" Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, that's not what I meant at all. From what I can see, you've been an amazing parent. But maybe your daughter is telling you that she's ready for something more than just the two of you taking care of each other." Victoria found herself studying this man who had somehow managed to articulate something she had been struggling to understand. There was no polish to his presentation, no calculated charm or strategic positioning, just honesty delivered with the confidence of someone who had learned important truths through difficult experience. "Daniel, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why aren't you intimidated by this? By me, by this office, by the whole situation? Most people would be." He smiled for the first time since he had walked into her office, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Mrs. Hale, Victoria, I clean offices like this every night. I know they're just rooms with expensive furniture. And I've learned that intimidating people are usually just scared people with better marketing. You don't scare me because I can see that you're trying to do right by your daughter, just like I'm trying to do right by my son." Victoria felt herself genuinely smile in return, struck by the refreshing directness of his perspective. When was the last time someone had talked to her like she was simply another parent trying to figure things out rather than a powerful CEO who needed to be impressed or managed? "Tell me about Ethan," she said. Daniel's face lit up with unmistakable parental pride. "He's brilliant. Loves science, builds these incredibly complicated Lego structures, asks questions about everything. He's also stubborn, terrible at keeping his room clean, and has strong opinions about breakfast foods. Last week he informed me that cereal for dinner is actually more logical than cereal for breakfast, because you need more energy during the day, not when you're going to sleep." That sounds like something Lila would say. She once convinced me that ice cream before dinner was actually practical because cold foods take more energy to digest, so it was basically like exercising. Did it work? We had ice cream before dinner for a week until I realized she had completely made up the science behind her argument. They both laughed, and Victoria realized that this was the first genuinely relaxed conversation she had had in weeks. There was something refreshing about talking to someone who wasn't trying to network or position himself for business advantage. "Daniel, I have to be honest with you. This whole situation is more complicated than it probably seems from the outside. There are professional pressures, public relations concerns, and frankly, I'm not entirely sure my daughter thought through all the implications of what she started last night. But you're still here talking to me instead of shutting it down." "Yes." "Why?" Victoria considered the question, aware that her answer would reveal more about her priorities than any business decision she had made in years. "Because she asked for something that matters to her, and I don't want to teach her that asking for what you need is something to be ashamed of." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's a good reason." Before Victoria could respond, Rachel appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely controlled urgency. "Victoria, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the board meeting is starting, and they're asking for you. Also, there are 3 news vans in the parking garage, and security is asking how you want to handle media requests." Victoria felt the weight of her converging responsibilities settle back on her shoulders. In 20 minutes, she would need to walk into a room full of powerful people who expected her to prioritize their concerns over her daughter's feelings. And tomorrow, the story would continue to unfold in public, whether she was ready for it or not. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Are you doing this for the right reasons? Because if you're looking for a shortcut to financial security or social status, this is going to end badly for everyone involved, especially the kids. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him weighing his words carefully. 3 years ago, when my wife died, I had to figure out how to be both parents to an 8-year-old boy who was angry at the world and scared of everything. I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned something important. Kids don't need perfect parents. They need honest ones who love them enough to keep trying, even when it's hard. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. I'm not applying for this because I want something from you. I'm applying because I think your daughter deserves to have someone fight for her happiness the same way I'd fight for my son's. And if that's not enough, or if you find someone better qualified, that's okay too. But at least she'll know that someone took her seriously. Victoria found herself genuinely moved by his answer, and also acutely aware that she was about to walk into a room where people would question her judgment for even considering such an unconventional approach to her personal life. I have to go deal with some business issues, she said, standing up. But Daniel, I'd like you to meet Lila. Would you be available this weekend for lunch? Somewhere casual where she can be herself. I'd be honored, he said simply. And bring Ethan. If we're going to explore this possibility, the kids should get to know each other too. After Daniel left, Victoria stood in her office looking out at the city and trying to prepare herself for the battle she was about to face. In 5 minutes, she would walk into that conference room and defend her right to prioritize her daughter's emotional needs over her board's political concerns. But for the first time since Lila's announcement the night before, Victoria felt like she was making the right choice regardless of the consequences. The boardroom felt like a courtroom as Victoria entered, and she could immediately sense that the other members had spent her absence solidifying their position. Richard Evans sat with a stack of printed articles beside him, while Patricia Newman and James Morrison flanked the table with expressions that suggested they had already reached their verdict. The remaining board members, 5 others who typically followed Richard's lead on matters of corporate governance, looked up expectantly as Victoria took her seat. Victoria, thank you for joining us. Richard began with exaggerated formality. We've been discussing the events of last evening and their potential impact on the company's reputation and stock performance. I'm sure you have, Victoria replied, noting how he was already framing the conversation as if she were the one disrupting a previously harmonious situation. Before we proceed, Patricia interjected, I want to make it clear that we all respect your abilities as a CEO and your dedication to this company. But leadership requires difficult decisions, and sometimes personal desires must be subordinated to professional responsibilities. Victoria felt her temper beginning to simmer beneath her carefully maintained composure. Are you suggesting that considering my daughter's emotional needs constitutes a personal desire that threatens my professional judgment? We're suggesting, Richard said, sliding one of the printed articles across the table toward her, that turning your family life into a public spectacle raises legitimate questions about your priorities and decision-making capabilities. But Victoria glanced at the headline, CEO's Daughter Stages Public Dating Show, Is Victoria Hale Fit to Lead? The article, published by a financial news website, questioned whether someone who would allow such a circus around their personal life could be trusted with shareholder interests. This is one opinion piece from a publication that has consistently criticized women in leadership positions, Victoria said, pushing the article back toward Richard. I hardly think it represents a crisis of confidence among our actual investors. Unfortunately, it's not just one article, James Morrison spoke up, activating the conference room's display screen. We've been monitoring social media sentiment and financial news coverage since early this morning. While some of the coverage is positive, focusing on your daughter's initiative and unconventional approach to family building, there's a significant negative thread questioning your judgment and stability. The screen filled with a compilation of headlines and social media posts. Some praised Lila's boldness and creativity, calling her wise beyond her years, and applauding Victoria for taking her daughter's needs seriously. But others were less charitable, using words like publicity stunt, desperate, and poor judgment to describe the situation. The concern, Patricia continued, is not necessarily about this specific incident, but about what it represents. Investors want predictability and stability from leadership. They want to know that their CEO makes rational decisions based on sound analysis, not emotional impulses. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized how effectively they were reframing her situation. What she saw as honoring her daughter's feelings, they were presenting as evidence of emotional instability and poor judgment. "So what exactly are you proposing?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Richard leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering necessary medicine. "Issue a statement immediately clarifying that last night's events were an unfortunate misunderstanding. Explain that while you appreciate your daughter's feelings, you're not actually planning to proceed with any kind of public selection process for a romantic partner. Focus the narrative back on your professional accomplishments and the company's continued growth. And if I refuse?" The silence that followed was answer enough, but Richard spelled it out anyway. "Then we'll need to seriously consider whether your judgment has become too compromised by personal matters to effectively lead this company. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders, Victoria. We can't allow personal dramas to undermine confidence in our leadership." Victoria looked around the table at people she had worked with for years, some of whom she had considered friends as well as colleagues. She could see the discomfort in several faces, but also the determination to protect what they saw as their primary responsibility. "I see," she said quietly. "And how exactly would such a consideration manifest itself?" "A vote of no confidence," Patricia said reluctantly, "which could ultimately lead to a recommendation that you step down as CEO while remaining on the board in an advisory capacity." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had built this company from nothing, had sacrificed personal relationships and countless hours to make it successful, and now they were threatening to remove her because she was taking her daughter's emotional needs seriously. "You do realize," Victoria said, her voice carefully controlled, despite the anger building inside her, "that this company exists because I built it. That every major decision that led to our current success was mine. That removing me would likely cause far more instability than anything that happened last night." "No one is questioning your past contributions," James said diplomatically, "but past performance doesn't guarantee future judgment. And right now we need leadership that prioritizes business stability over personal publicity." Victoria stood up abruptly, causing several board members to startle. "I need 10 minutes to consider your recommendation." She walked out of the conference room and directly to her office, closing the door behind her and leaning against it as if to physically block out the pressure from the boardroom. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below her, indifferent to the personal crisis playing out 40 stories above the street. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "Mom, I saw the news about your meeting. Are you in trouble because of me? I can say it was all a joke if that helps." Victoria stared at the message, feeling her daughter's willingness to sacrifice her own stated needs to protect her mother's career. It was exactly the kind of selfless gesture that made Victoria proud of who Lila was becoming, and exactly the kind of choice that no 10-year-old should have to make. She typed back, "Never apologize for asking for what you need. I'll handle the grown-up problems." But as she prepared to return to the boardroom, Victoria wasn't entirely sure how he was going to keep that promise. The rational part of her mind was already calculating the professional costs of standing firm against the board's demands. Her company's stock was publicly traded, which meant that sustained negative publicity could genuinely impact thousands of investors. Her employees depended on the company's stability for their livelihoods. And Richard Evans wasn't entirely wrong about the importance of leadership appearing stable and predictable. On the other hand, capitulating to the board's demands would send an unmistakable message to Lila that adult priorities would always trump her emotional needs when the stakes got high enough. It would teach her daughter that asking for what you want was acceptable only as long as it didn't inconvenience the people in power. Victoria returned to the conference room to find the board members in quiet conversation that stopped immediately when she entered. She took her seat and looked around the table at faces that were expectant, concerned, and in Richard's case, smugly confident. "I've given serious consideration to your concerns," she began, "and I understand the position you feel you're in regarding your fiduciary responsibilities." Richard nodded approvingly, clearly anticipating capitulation. "However," Victoria continued, "I've decided that I cannot and will not issue a statement dismissing my daughter's request as a misunderstanding." Oh, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the implications of her decision sank in. "Victoria," Patricia said carefully, "I don't think you fully understand the position this puts us all in." "I understand it perfectly. You're asking me to choose between my role as a CEO and my role as a mother. You're asking me to teach my daughter that her emotional needs are less important than other people's comfort with my decisions. And you're asking me to prioritize protecting my professional reputation over honoring a promise I made to the most important person in my life." "That's not," James began, but Victoria held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not finished. You're also asking me to make that choice based on speculation about potential negative consequences rather than any actual evidence of harm to the company. Our stock price fluctuates regularly based on market conditions, news cycles, and investor sentiment. A 2-point dip following unusual publicity is hardly unprecedented or catastrophic." Richard's face was beginning to show signs of genuine anger now. "Victoria, you're being emotional and irrational. This is exactly the kind of decision-making that concerns us." "Emotional?" Victoria felt her carefully maintained composure finally slip. "Richard, let me ask you something. How many times have you made business decisions based on your desire to provide for your family? How many networking events have you attended, clients have you courted, or strategic partnerships have you pursued because you wanted to ensure your children's future security? That's completely different." "No, it's not. It's only different because society views fathers providing for their families as rational and responsible, while mothers prioritizing their children's emotional well-being is seen as sentimental and unprofessional." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, making several board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Victoria could see that her words had hit their target, particularly with Patricia, who had 2 children of her own and had undoubtedly faced similar double standards throughout her career. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "you're assuming that this situation will necessarily be damaging to the company. But consider the alternative narrative: a successful businesswoman who takes her daughter's needs seriously enough to explore unconventional solutions. A leader who values authenticity and genuine relationships over superficial appearances. A CEO who isn't afraid to be human in public." "That's a very optimistic interpretation," Richard said dismissively. "It's also a very accurate one. I've spent the morning reviewing the actual media coverage, not just the negative examples you've cherry-picked. For every article questioning my judgment, there are two praising my daughter's insight and my willingness to prioritize family relationships. The story is resonating with people precisely because it's authentic. Victoria stood up again this time, with the confidence of someone who had found her footing. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to continue with the process Lila initiated, but I'm going to do it thoughtfully and responsibly. I'll meet with the candidates who expressed genuine interest, evaluate them based on their character and compatibility with our family, and make decisions that prioritize my daughter's well-being while maintaining appropriate boundaries. And if the board decides that's unacceptable, Richard asked coldly, then you'll do what you think is necessary and I'll do what I think is right. But consider this. Do you really want to be the board that fired a successful female CEO for taking her daughter's emotional needs seriously? Do you think that story will play better in the media than the current one? The implicit threat was clear, and Victoria could see several board members reconsidering their positions as they contemplated the potential backlash against removing a mother for prioritizing her child's happiness. I need to know where each of you stands, Victoria said, looking around the table. Are you prepared to vote no confidence in my leadership based on this issue? One by one, the board members responded. Patricia and James Morrison both expressed their intention to support Victoria's leadership while asking for regular updates on the situation. Two others reluctantly agreed to withhold judgment pending the actual outcomes of her decisions. Another two sided with Richard, expressing serious concerns about the precedent being set. Richard himself remained defiant. This isn't over, Victoria. If this situation continues to generate negative publicity or impact our stock performance, I will revisit the question of your fitness for leadership. I wouldn't expect anything less, Victoria replied. But Richard, the next time you want to question my judgment, I'd suggest having a stronger argument than speculation and gender bias. After the board meeting ended and the members filed out, Victoria remained in the conference room feeling both victorious and exhausted. She had successfully defended her position, but the political cost would likely be significant. Richard Evans wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and he would undoubtedly be looking for opportunities to undermine her leadership going forward. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her publicist, Maria Santos, whom Victoria had worked with for several years on company communications and crisis management. Victoria, please tell me you have a strategy for managing this situation, Maria said without preamble. Because right now the narrative is completely out of control and we need to get ahead of it before it spirals further. Actually, I do have a strategy, Victoria replied. I'm going to be honest about what we're doing and why we're doing it instead of trying to spin it or make it disappear. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to make Victoria wonder if the call had been dropped. Maria, are you still there? I'm here. I'm just trying to process what you just said. Victoria, honesty is a beautiful concept, but public relations is about managing perceptions and controlling messaging. What you're describing is the opposite of damage control. Maybe damage control is the wrong approach, Victoria said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. Maybe instead of trying to minimize this story, we should own it. Present it as what it actually is, a successful businesswoman and devoted mother working together to build the family they both want. And if it backfires, if the media turns against you, if investors lose confidence, if your business relationships suffer, Victoria thought about her daughter's text message, her willingness to sacrifice her own stated needs to protect her mother's career. She thought about Daniel Brooks sitting in her office and talking about the importance of showing up for the people you love. She thought about Richard Evans and his colleagues ready to punish her for prioritizing her child's emotional well-being. "Then at least I'll know I stood up for what matters most," she said finally. After ending the call with Maria, Victoria made her way back to her office where Rachel was waiting with an updated list of media requests, candidate applications, and messages from friends and colleagues. The attention was overwhelming, but Victoria was beginning to see it differently than she had that morning. "Rachel, I want you to schedule interviews with the other 4 candidates for this week. Professional meetings like we discussed, but I want Lila involved in all of them." "Got it. What about the media requests?" Victoria considered the question. Every instinct told her to avoid additional publicity until the situation stabilized, but her conversation with the board had clarified something important. She was going to be judged regardless of how much or little she said publicly. She might as well ensure that the narrative included her own perspective. "Schedule an interview with Channel 7's morning show for tomorrow. I'll do one sit-down interview to explain our approach and set the record straight about our intentions." "Are you sure that's wise? Every word you say will be analyzed and potentially taken out of context." "Probably, but staying silent means letting other people define the story, and I'm not willing to allow that anymore." That evening, Victoria found herself in an unusual situation, cooking dinner at home instead of working late at the office or attending a business function. Lila sat at the kitchen counter, ostensibly doing homework, but actually providing commentary on the day's events, while Victoria attempted to prepare something more elaborate than their usual takeout rotation. "Mom, were those people really mean to you in your meeting today?" Lila asked, looking up from her math worksheet. Victoria paused in her attempt to figure out how to properly season the chicken she was attempting to cook. "They weren't mean exactly. They were concerned about how our personal decisions might affect the business. But you built that business right, like it wouldn't exist without you." "That's true. So how can they tell you what to do with your personal life that doesn't make sense?" Victoria smiled at her daughter's straightforward logic. "Unfortunately, sweetheart, grown-up relationships are more complicated than that. When you run a company, you have responsibilities to other people, employees, investors, customers. Sometimes those responsibilities can conflict with personal choices." Lila frowned, clearly wrestling with a concept that didn't align with her sense of fairness. "But if you always make good decisions for the business, why don't they trust you to make good decisions about our family?" The question was so insightful that Victoria had to stop what she was doing and really consider it. Why didn't the board trust her judgment about her personal life when they had consistently relied on her judgment about far more complex business matters? "I think," Victoria said slowly, "it's because some people believe that successful women aren't supposed to prioritize their families. They think we should either be perfect mothers or perfect businesswomen, but not both." "That's stupid," Lila declared with characteristic directness. "It is stupid, but it's also the way the world works sometimes." "Well, maybe we can help change how the world works." Victoria looked at her daughter, struck once again by the wisdom that seemed to emerge from her 10-year-old mind with startling regularity. "Maybe we can," she agreed. They ate dinner together at the kitchen table, something that hadn't happened on a weeknight in months, due to Victoria's usual schedule of evening meetings and business functions. As they talked about Lila's school day upcoming science project and weekend plans, Victoria realized how much of their normal routine she had been missing in pursuit of professional obligations. "Mom," Lila said as they were cleaning up the dishes, "are you nervous about meeting all the dad candidates?" "A little," Victoria admitted. "This isn't exactly a situation I have experience with." "What did you think about Daniel?" Victoria considered how to answer honestly, without influencing her daughter's opinions. "I thought he was genuine. He seemed like someone who understands what it means to put a child's needs first. That's what I thought too from his letter. But I want to meet all of them before I decide anything. It's like when you're hiring someone at work, right? You have to interview everyone before you know who's the best fit. That's very mature thinking, sweetheart. I've been thinking about this for a long time, Mom. Longer than just yesterday. I see how other families work, and I see how hard you work to take care of both of us by yourself. I think maybe it would be good for you to have help too. Victoria felt something shift in her chest as she realized that her daughter's request wasn't just about wanting a father figure for herself, it was also about wanting support for her mother. The insight was both touching and slightly heartbreaking, as it suggested that Lila had been worrying about Victoria's well-being in ways that no 10-year-old should have to. Lila, I want you to know that taking care of you is never a burden. It's the best part of my life. I know that, Mom, but that doesn't mean it's not hard sometimes. And maybe if you had someone else to help with the hard parts, you could enjoy the good parts even more. That night, after Lila had gone to bed, Victoria sat in her home office reviewing the applications from the other candidates. Dr. James Wellington's submission included detailed information about his medical practice, his volunteer work with children's charities, and references from colleagues who vouched for his character and stability. Marcus Chen's application was equally impressive, highlighting his legal expertise, financial security, and involvement in youth mentoring programs. David Rodriguez had submitted photos from his restaurant's family-friendly events, testimonials from Little League parents about his coaching skills, and a heartfelt essay about the importance of community and tradition in raising children. Christopher Blake's portfolio emphasized his business success, philanthropic contributions, and extensive travel experiences that could provide educational opportunities for a child. All four men were accomplished, stable, and seemingly genuine in their interest. On paper, any of them would be considered an excellent choice for a successful single mother seeking a partner. But as Victoria reviewed their credentials, she found herself thinking about Daniel Brooks's simple statement about understanding what it meant to put a child's needs first. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria, her publicist. Channel 7 confirmed for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They want to do the interview at your home to create a more personal atmosphere. I've prepared talking points that should help keep the conversation focused on positive aspects of your decision-making process. Victoria typed back, "No talking points. I'm going to answer their questions honestly." Maria's response came immediately. "Victoria, please reconsider. Unscripted interviews are dangerous, especially in situations like this where every word will be scrutinized. Then I'll be careful with my words, but I won't be dishonest about our motivations or apologetic about our choices." As she prepared for bed, Victoria reflected on how much her life had changed in the span of 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she had been a successful CEO with a carefully controlled public image and a private life that she managed according to her own preferences. Tonight, she was preparing to defend her parenting choices on television while navigating a potential board revolt and managing a very public search for a romantic partner. The transformation was overwhelming, but as she thought about Lila's wisdom and courage in asking for what she needed, Victoria realized that maybe overwhelming wasn't necessarily bad. Maybe her life had become so carefully controlled that it had lost some essential spontaneity and authenticity. Maybe her daughter's bold request was exactly the kind of disruption they both needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the interviews with the other candidates began, and the media attention continued to intensify. But tonight, Victoria fell asleep feeling something she hadn't experienced in years, the excitement of not knowing exactly what would happen next, and the confidence that whatever emerged, she and Lila would face it together. The television crew arrived at Victoria's home at 7:30 the next morning, transforming her normally peaceful living room into a bustling production set, complete with lights, cameras, and enough equipment to broadcast live from a war zone. Victoria watched from the kitchen as technicians adjusted lighting angles and tested audio levels, while Lila observed the entire process with the fascination of someone witnessing magic in action. "Mom, are you going to be on TV all the time now?" Lila asked, perched on a bar stool, with a bowl of cereal that she had barely touched. "I hope not, sweetheart. This is just to explain our side of the story, so people understand what we're actually doing." "What if they ask mean questions?" Victoria paused in her attempt to drink coffee with hands that were trembler than she cared to admit. "Then I'll answer them honestly and hope that people can understand our perspective." The interviewer was Sarah Chen, a respected morning show host, known for her ability to ask tough questions while maintaining a warm, conversational tone. Victoria had seen her work often enough to know that Sarah would be thorough but fair, which was exactly what this situation required. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for agreeing to speak with us," Sarah said, as they settled into chairs positioned to capture both the interview subjects and a tasteful view of the family photos that decorated Victoria's living room. "I think many people are curious about what really happened at the charity gala and what your family is planning to do next." Victoria took a breath, acutely aware that millions of people would judge both her parenting and her leadership based on the next few minutes of conversation. "Sarah, what happened at the gala was simply my daughter expressing something she's been thinking about for a long time. Lila has been watching other families and wondering what it would be like to have a father figure who was genuinely invested in her well-being. When she had the opportunity to speak publicly, she asked for what she needed. And you've decided to honor that request by actually meeting with potential candidates. I've decided to take my daughter's feelings seriously, yes. If she's ready to expand our family, then I think we should explore that possibility thoughtfully and carefully." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression indicating that she was moving into more challenging territory. Some critics have suggested that this approach turns something as personal as choosing a life partner into a publicity stunt. How do you respond to that? Victoria felt her shoulders tense but forced herself to maintain eye contact with the interviewer. "I understand why some people might see it that way, but I'd ask them to consider the alternative. Should I dismiss my daughter's feelings because they became public? Should I teach her that asking for what you need is something to be ashamed of if other people are watching? But surely, there are more private ways to address her feelings about wanting a father figure. Of course there are. And if Lila had come to me privately, we would have handled this privately. But she chose to express herself publicly, and I think that choice deserves respect rather than punishment." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of choices, you're facing some criticism from business colleagues about how this situation might affect your role as CEO of Hale Industries. How do you balance your responsibilities as a mother with your professional obligations?" This was the question Victoria had been expecting, and she had spent considerable time the night before thinking about her answer. "Sarah, I've been successfully managing both roles for 10 years. My company has grown consistently. Our employees are well compensated and satisfied, and our investors have seen steady returns on their investments. I don't think one weekend of unusual personal publicity erases a decade of professional achievement. But some board members have expressed concerns. Some board members have expressed opinions," Victoria interrupted gently but firmly. "And they're entitled to those opinions. But I was hired to make good decisions for the company and for the people who depend on it for their livelihoods. I believe that includes modeling healthy family relationships and showing that successful women don't have to choose between career achievement and personal fulfillment." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly at the directness of Victoria's response. That's a strong statement. It's an honest statement. I think we need to stop pretending that women in leadership positions are supposed to be emotionless robots who never prioritize their families. That's not realistic, and it's not healthy. Can you tell us about the men who have applied to be considered as potential partners? What are you looking for? Victoria smiled for the first time since the interview began. We're looking for someone who understands that joining our family means exactly that, joining our family, not just dating me. Lila needs to feel comfortable and respected, and any man who becomes part of our lives needs to be genuinely interested in being a positive influence on a 10-year-old girl. And how will you make that determination? We'll spend time together in normal everyday situations. We'll see how he interacts with Lila when she's being her authentic self, not just when she's on her best behavior. We'll observe whether he listens to her opinions, respects her boundaries, and genuinely enjoys her company. This sounds almost like a job interview process. In some ways, it is. Being a parent is one of the most important jobs anyone can have, and I think it deserves the same careful consideration we'd give to any other significant responsibility. As the interview concluded and the production crew began packing their equipment, Victoria felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had been honest about her motivations and approach, but she had also potentially made herself vulnerable to further criticism from people who disagreed with her choices. "Mom, you did really good," Lila said, appearing at her side as the last of the equipment was loaded into trucks. "You sounded like you knew exactly what you were talking about." "I hope so, sweetheart. This afternoon, we meet with Dr. Wellington, and tomorrow we'll see Mr. Chen. Are you ready for that?" "I think so, but Mom, I want to ask them some questions too. Is that okay?" Victoria looked at her daughter's serious expression and realized that Lila was approaching this process with the same thoughtfulness and determination that had characterized her original announcement. "What kind of questions?" "Important ones. Like what they think makes a good dad, and what they would do if I was having a bad day, and whether they actually like kids or just think they're supposed to like kids." "Those are very good questions, Lila, and yes, you should definitely ask them." Dr. James Wellington arrived at their home that afternoon with the punctuality of someone accustomed to managing a busy medical practice and the slightly nervous energy of a man who wasn't entirely sure what he had gotten himself into. He was tall and distinguished with graying temples and the kind of professional demeanor that inspired confidence in patients and colleagues alike. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he said, offering a firm handshake and a warm smile. "And you must be Lila. I've heard a great deal about you." "You heard about me on TV," Lila replied with characteristic directness. "That's different from actually knowing me." Victoria watched Dr. Wellington's reaction to her daughter's blunt assessment, noting that he seemed more amused than offended by the distinction. "You're absolutely right," he said, settling into the living room chair that Victoria had indicated. "Would you be willing to help me get to know the real you?" "That depends on whether you really want to know or whether you're just saying that because you think it's what I want to hear." Dr. Wellington was quiet for a moment, and Victoria could see him reconsidering his approach. She appreciated that he was taking Lila's challenge seriously rather than trying to charm his way past it. "Lila, can I tell you something honestly?" "Okay. I'm a little nervous about this meeting. I've never been in a situation like this before, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to say or do. But I applied to meet with you and your mother because I was impressed by your courage in asking for what you needed, and I thought maybe I could learn something from you about what it means to be a good father." Victoria felt herself warming to Dr. Wellington's honesty. Instead of presenting himself as having all the answers, he was acknowledging that this was a learning experience for everyone involved. What do you want to learn? Lila asked. I want to understand what makes you feel safe and happy. I want to know what kinds of things you worry about and what kinds of things make you excited. I want to figure out whether I'm the kind of person who could make your life better, not just different. Lila studied him with the intensity of someone conducting a very important evaluation. Do you have kids? No, I don't. I've been focused on my medical practice for most of my adult life, and I never felt like I had time to start a family. But lately, I've been wondering if maybe I focused too much on work and missed out on something important. Like what? Like the experience of watching someone grow up and discover who they're going to become. Like being part of a family where people take care of each other, not just professionally, but personally. Victoria found herself genuinely impressed by Dr. Wellington's thoughtful responses. He wasn't trying to impress them with his accomplishments or charm them with rehearsed answers. Instead, he was engaging with Lila as if her opinions and feelings genuinely mattered to him. Dr. Wellington, Lila said, what do you think makes someone a good dad? That's an excellent question. I think a good dad listens more than he talks. He pays attention to what his child actually needs, not just what he thinks they should need. He's patient when they make mistakes, and he helps them figure out how to do better next time without making them feel stupid or ashamed. What if the kid doesn't like the same things he likes? Then he learns about the things his child does like, and he finds ways to support their interests even if he doesn't fully understand them. Victoria watched her daughter nod approvingly at this answer, and she realized that Dr. Wellington was passing Lila's unspoken tests with impressive consistency. They spent the next hour in conversation that ranged from Lila's school experiences and future aspirations to Dr. Wellington's work at the hospital and his thoughts about balancing professional responsibilities with family time. Victoria was struck by how naturally he adapted his communication style to Lila's directness, neither talking down to her nor overwhelming her with adult complexity. Dr. Wellington, Lila said, as their meeting was winding down. If you became my dad, would you try to change things about me that you didn't like? The question was so direct and vulnerable that Victoria felt her heart clench. It revealed fears about acceptance and conditional love that her daughter had apparently been carrying without expressing them. Dr. Wellington leaned forward, meeting Lila's eyes with complete seriousness. Lila, if I became your dad, my job would be to help you become the best version of yourself, not to turn you into someone different. The things that make you unique and special, your intelligence, your honesty, your courage, those are things to celebrate, not to change. Even if I'm difficult sometimes. Especially then. Being difficult usually means you're thinking for yourself and standing up for what you believe in. Those are good qualities even when they're inconvenient for the adults around you. After Dr. Wellington left, Victoria and Lila sat together on the couch, processing their first official candidate interview. What did you think? Victoria asked. I liked him, Lila said thoughtfully. He listened to my questions and he didn't try to pretend he knew everything about being a dad. But Mom, yes, I want to meet all of them before I decide anything. It's like you always say about business, you can't make the best choice if you don't know all your options. The next morning brought Marcus Chen, whose approach to their meeting was notably different from Dr. Wellington's medical professionalism. Marcus arrived with a small wrapped gift for Lila, and an easy confidence that suggested he was comfortable in unfamiliar social situations. I hope you don't mind, he said, presenting Lila with a package that turned out to contain a beautifully illustrated book about famous female scientists throughout history. I thought you might enjoy reading about women who changed the world through their discoveries and inventions. Lila examined the book with obvious interest, but Victoria noticed that she didn't immediately warm to Marcus the way she had to Dr. Wellington's more understated approach. Thank you, Lila said politely. Do you always bring presents when you meet new people? Marcus laughed, seemingly delighted by her directness. Only when I'm trying to make a good first impression on someone whose opinion matters a lot. Why does my opinion matter to you? You don't even know me yet. Because your mother is someone I respect and admire, and you're the most important person in her life. If I want to be part of your family, then your approval is more important than anyone else's. Victoria appreciated the sentiment, but something about Marcus's delivery felt slightly rehearsed, as if he had prepared for exactly this type of conversation. It wasn't necessarily insincere, but it lacked the spontaneous honesty that had characterized Dr. Wellington's responses. Mr. Chen, Lila continued, what do you know about being a dad? I know that it's probably the most important job anyone can have, Marcus replied. I've watched my friends raise their children, and I've seen how much patience, creativity, and love it requires. I've also seen how rewarding it can be when you help a young person discover their potential and achieve their goals. But you've never actually been a dad yourself. No, I haven't. But I've been mentoring teenagers through the Big Brother program for the past 5 years, and I think that's taught me something about connecting with young people and being a positive influence in their lives. Lila nodded thoughtfully. What kinds of things do you do with the kids you mentor? We work on homework together, go to museums and sporting events, talk about their plans for the future. I try to help them see possibilities they might not have considered and encourage them to believe in themselves. That sounds nice, Lila said, though Victoria detected a note of reservation in her daughter's voice. But what about when they're sad or scared or angry? What do you do then? Marcus paused, and Victoria could see him considering his answer more carefully. I try to listen and help them work through their feelings. Sometimes that means just being present while they talk about what's bothering them. Sometimes it means helping them brainstorm solutions to problems they're facing. And if they don't want to talk about it, then I respect their need for space while making sure they know I'm available when they're ready. The conversation continued for another 45 minutes, covering topics from Marcus's legal practice to his thoughts about education and extracurricular activities. He was articulate, thoughtful, and clearly genuine in his interest in their family. But Victoria noticed that Lila seemed more guarded with him than she had been with Dr. Wellington, asking follow-up questions that suggested she was testing his responses, rather than simply engaging in natural conversation. After Marcus left, Victoria asked her daughter for her impressions. He's nice, Lila said carefully. And he's smart, and he obviously cares about helping kids, but what? I think he likes the idea of being a dad more than he actually understands what it means. Like he knows the right things to say, but I'm not sure he really gets how hard it is sometimes. Victoria was struck by her daughter's perceptive analysis. Marcus had indeed seemed to approach their conversation as if he were interviewing for a position he had researched thoroughly, but never actually performed. What makes you think that, when I asked him about what to do when kids are sad or angry, his answers sounded like things he read in a book? Dr. Wellington's answers sounded like things he figured out by actually dealing with upset people. The following day brought David Rodriguez, whose approach was immediately different from either of his predecessors. He arrived in casual clothes rather than business attire, and instead of conducting a formal interview in their living room, he suggested they visit his flagship restaurant so Lila could see the environment where he spent most of his time. I thought you might like to see what I do all day, he explained as they walked through the bustling kitchen of Rodriguez's family restaurant. And I wanted you to meet some of the people I work with, including my nieces and nephews, who help out on weekends. Victoria watched Lila's eyes light up as David introduced her to his staff, from the head chef, who had been with him for 12 years, to the teenage hostess who was working her way through college. There was an easy warmth to his interactions with everyone they met, and Victoria could see why his restaurants had developed such loyal followings in the communities they served. "Uncle David," a voice called from near the dessert station, and a girl who looked to be about Lila's age came running over. "Mom said you were bringing special visitors today." "Sophia, I'd like you to meet Lila and her mother Victoria," David said, his face lighting up with obvious affection for his niece. "Lila Sophia helps me test all our new dessert recipes. She has the most sophisticated palate of anyone under the age of 16. The two girls immediately began comparing notes about their favorite foods and least favorite vegetables while David and Victoria watched with the amusement of adults witnessing an instant friendship. "Sophia's been working here since she was 8, David explained quietly. "Her mother brings her and her brother after school, and they do homework in the back booth before helping with small tasks during dinner service. It's taught them about responsibility and teamwork, but more importantly, it's given them a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves." Victoria found herself impressed by David's natural ease with children and his obvious commitment to family relationships. Unlike the previous candidates who had spoken about their theoretical approaches to parenting, David was demonstrating his actual experience with young people in real-world situations. "Mr. Rodriguez," Lila said, having finished her conversation with Sophia, "do you want kids of your own?" "I do," David replied without hesitation. "I've always imagined having a family, but I wanted to be financially stable and emotionally ready before I took on that responsibility. I've spent the last 10 years building these restaurants, not just as businesses, but as places where families can gather and children can feel welcome." What if your kids didn't want to work in restaurants? What if they wanted to do something completely different? David smiled at the question. "Then I'd support whatever they wanted to do, as long as they were passionate about it and willing to work hard." Success isn't about following in your parents' footsteps. It's about finding your own path and walking it with integrity. They spent the afternoon learning about restaurant operations, sampling new menu items, and observing David's interactions with both customers and staff. Victoria was struck by how naturally he included Lila in conversations, asking for her opinions about everything from the music selection to the color scheme for a new location. "Lila," David said, as they prepared to leave, "would you like to come back sometime and help me plan the kids' menu for our new restaurant? I could use advice from someone who actually knows what young people want to eat." "Really? You'd let me help with actual business decisions?" "Of course. The kids' menu is one of our most important features, and who better to consult than someone who's actually part of our target demographic?" As they drove home, Victoria could see that Lila was processing her experience with David differently than she had the previous interviews. "He's different from the others," Lila observed. "How so?" "He didn't try to impress me with fancy words or perfect answers. He just let me see who he really is and how he treats the people he cares about." "And what did you think of what you saw?" "I think he's the kind of person who keeps his promises. And I think he actually likes being around kids, not just the idea of being around kids." The final scheduled interview was with Christopher Blake, whose approach proved to be the most unconventional yet. Instead of meeting at Victoria's home or his workplace, Christopher suggested they spend the day at the city's science museum, explaining that he wanted to learn about Lila's interests while sharing some of his own. "I thought we could explore the exhibits together," he said, as they met in the museum's soaring atrium. "I'm particularly excited about the new space exploration display, and I understand you're interested in science." Christopher turned out to be an enthusiastic and knowledgeable guide, explaining complex concepts in ways that were accessible without being condescending. He seemed genuinely excited by Lila's questions and observations, often building on her ideas rather than simply answering them. "Mr. Blake," Lila said, as they stood before a display about Mars exploration. If you had unlimited money, what would you want to accomplish? That's a fascinating question. I think I'd want to fund educational programs that help young people develop critical thinking skills and scientific literacy. Too many kids grow up thinking that science and technology are only for special people, when actually they're tools that everyone can learn to use. What about your own family? Would you want to travel and do exciting things? Or would you want to stay home and have a normal life? Christopher paused, considering the question, with obvious seriousness. I think the best families find ways to do both. Adventure and stability aren't opposites. They're both important for helping children develop confidence and curiosity about the world. Victoria found herself impressed by Christopher's thoughtfulness and his genuine interest in Lila's perspectives. Unlike some successful businessmen she had known, he didn't seem to view children as small adults who needed to be managed or impressed. Instead, he engaged with Lila as if her thoughts and opinions were inherently valuable. Would you want to have more kids if you joined our family? Lila asked with her characteristic directness. I'd want whatever would make our family complete and happy, Christopher replied. If you wanted a sibling, that's something your mother and I would discuss. If you preferred being an only child, that would be fine too. The goal would be creating a family structure that works for everyone involved. As they concluded their visit to the museum, Victoria realized that Christopher had successfully engaged with both her professional interests and Lila's intellectual curiosity. He had demonstrated an ability to connect with a 10-year-old without abandoning his adult sophistication, and he had shown genuine respect for Lila's autonomy and intelligence. That evening, as Victoria and Lila sat together reviewing the week's interviews, Victoria found herself genuinely uncertain about which direction their decision-making process would take. What did you think of Mr. Blake? She asked. I liked how he talked to me like my ideas mattered, Lila replied thoughtfully. And I could tell he was really listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. So far, you've had positive things to say about all four of them. They're all good people, Mom. They're just good in different ways. Victoria waited, sensing that her daughter was working toward a more complete assessment. Dr. Wellington would be steady and reliable, and he'd always put our needs first. Mr. Chen would challenge me to achieve more and help me plan for the future. Mr. Rodriguez would make our home feel warm and welcoming, and he'd teach me about treating people with respect. Mr. Blake would encourage me to explore new ideas and see the world as full of possibilities. The analysis was so mature and comprehensive that Victoria had to remind herself she was listening to a 10-year-old's evaluation. Those are all wonderful qualities, Victoria said. So how do you choose between them? I don't think I can choose yet, Lila said slowly. They've all been trying to make good impressions, which makes sense. But I need to see how they act when things aren't going perfectly. What do you mean? I mean, I want to see what happens when I'm having a bad day, or when you're stressed about work, or when something goes wrong that nobody planned for. That's when you find out who people really are. Victoria looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. Somehow Lila had identified the exact limitation of their interview process and articulated a solution that was both logical and insightful. So what do you suggest we do? I want to spend more time with all of them, but in normal situations where they can't prepare special answers. Like when I'm sick or when I have homework I don't want to do or when I'm worried about something at school. As Victoria tucked her daughter into bed that night, she reflected on how much their lives had changed since the charity gala. What had begun as Lila's spontaneous request had evolved into a thoughtful evaluation process that was teaching them both important lessons about relationships, authenticity, and the courage required to ask for what you need. But even as she felt proud of how they were handling the situation, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest challenges were still ahead of them. The media attention was intensifying. The board's patience was wearing thin, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she kept thinking about Daniel Brooks and the quiet certainty in his voice when he talked about putting children's needs first. Tomorrow would bring new decisions and new complications, but tonight, Victoria fell asleep, feeling grateful for her daughter's wisdom and confident that whatever they decided, they were making choices based on authentic understanding rather than superficial impressions. The weekend that would change everything began with an unexpected phone call at 6 a.m. Saturday morning. Victoria fumbled for her phone, still half asleep, and was surprised to see Daniel Brooks's name on the caller ID. "Victoria, I'm so sorry to call this early, but there's been an emergency at the Meridian building. A water main burst in the basement and it's flooding the entire lower level, including the server room for several companies. I know Hale Industries has offices there, and I thought you should know." Victoria was instantly awake, her mind racing through the implications. The Meridian building housed not only her company's main offices, but also their primary data servers and backup systems. A flood could be catastrophic. "How bad is it?" she asked, already getting out of bed and reaching for clothes. "Bad. The building management is in full crisis mode, and they've called in every available maintenance worker to help with damage control. I'm here now, but I thought maybe you'd want to see the situation firsthand." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Victoria said, then paused. "Daniel, thank you for thinking to call me. Most people wouldn't have." "Most people don't understand how much a business can lose when their data systems go down," he replied simply. As Victoria rushed to get dressed, Lila appeared in her doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mom, what's wrong?" "There's a problem at the office building, sweetheart. I need to go deal with it." "Can I come with you? It's Saturday, and you said we were going to have lunch with Daniel and his son today anyway." Victoria hesitated. Bringing Lila to a flood emergency wasn't exactly ideal parenting, but the alternative was canceling their planned meeting with Daniel and Ethan, which felt wrong given how much thought Lila had put into her evaluation process. "All right, but you'll need to stay out of the way while the adults handle the emergency." When they arrived at the Meridian building, Victoria was shocked by the extent of the damage. Water was still pouring from emergency pumps, and the lobby floor was covered with industrial fans and dehumidifiers. Building management personnel, insurance adjusters, and emergency contractors moved through the space with the controlled urgency of people dealing with a multi-million-dollar disaster. Daniel appeared almost immediately wearing waterproof coveralls and carrying a tablet with what appeared to be building schematics. "The good news is that we caught it before it reached the electrical systems," he said without preamble. "The bad news is that at least 6 inches of water got into the basement level, where most of the server equipment is housed." "How much of our data is at risk?" Victoria asked, her mind automatically shifting into crisis management mode. "That depends on how quickly we can get the servers moved to a dry location and how much damage the water actually caused. I've been working with the IT emergency response team, and I think I might have found a solution, but it's going to require some creative problem solving." As Daniel led them toward the basement level, Victoria found herself impressed by his calm competence in a genuinely chaotic situation. This wasn't the nervous maintenance worker she had met in her office a week ago. This was someone who clearly understood complex systems and could think strategically under pressure. "Mr. Daniel?" Ethan's voice echoed through the stairwell as they descended. Daniel's 8-year-old son appeared around a corner, wearing a too large safety vest and carrying a small toolkit. "I finished documenting the water levels in Section C like you asked." "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Victoria asked, surprised to see a child in what was essentially a disaster zone. Dad got called in early for the emergency, and Mrs. Martinez couldn't watch me until later, Ethan explained matter-of-factly. So Dad brought me along to help. I'm good at measuring things and taking notes. Lila immediately perked up with interest. What kind of measurements? Water depth temperature readings from the server's timeline, documentation for the insurance reports. Ethan replied with the precision of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. Dad taught me how to help with emergency documentation when big problems happen. Victoria watched the interaction between the two children with fascination. Unlike the carefully orchestrated meetings she had arranged with the other candidates, this was a completely authentic situation where both Daniel and Ethan were simply being themselves under stress. The main issue, Daniel continued, leading them to the flooded server room, is that your company's backup systems are in the same location as the primary servers. If we can't get them dried out and operational within the next few hours, you're looking at potentially losing weeks of data and facing significant downtime. Victoria surveyed the room, feeling her stomach drop as she calculated the potential business impact. Her board was already questioning her judgment. A major data loss could provide Richard Evans with exactly the ammunition he needed to force her out. However, Daniel continued, I think there might be a way to temporarily relocate your essential systems to the building's emergency backup facility on the 15th floor. It would require some creative rewiring and a lot of very careful equipment moving, but it could keep your systems online while we deal with the flood damage. Is that even possible? Victoria asked. It is if we can get the right people working together, and if management approves the emergency modifications I'm proposing. Victoria found herself studying Daniel's face as he outlined his solution. This was clearly someone who understood complex technical systems far beyond what his job title suggested, and he was approaching the problem with the kind of strategic thinking she associated with her best senior engineers. Daniel, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What's your background? Because what you're describing sounds like it requires expertise that goes well beyond building maintenance. Daniel was quiet for a moment, and Victoria could see him weighing how much to reveal. I have a degree in electrical engineering from State University, he said finally. I worked in tech for 8 years before my wife got sick. When she died and I became a single parent, I needed a job with more flexible hours and better benefits, so I took the maintenance position here. It pays less, but it allows me to be available for Ethan when he needs me. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Daniel wasn't just a maintenance worker who happened to be intelligent and thoughtful. He was a trained professional who had sacrificed career advancement to prioritize his child's needs. Why didn't you mention this before? She asked. Because it's not relevant to what you and Lila are looking for in a father figure, Daniel replied simply. You need someone who can put your daughter's needs first, not someone who's impressive on paper. My job title doesn't matter, but my priorities do. Over the next 4 hours, Victoria watched Daniel coordinate an emergency response that saved not only her company's data, but also the digital assets of 3 other businesses in the building. He worked seamlessly with IT professionals, building contractors and emergency services personnel, demonstrating a combination of technical expertise, leadership ability, and calm competence that rivaled anything she had seen in her own corporate environment. But more importantly, she watched how he included Ethan in the process, giving the 8-year-old meaningful responsibilities while ensuring his safety and explaining each step of their work. And she observed how Lila responded to both Daniel and Ethan, stepping naturally into a collaborative relationship that felt effortless and authentic. Dad, Mrs. Hale's servers are running at normal temperature now, Ethan reported, consulting his tablet with the seriousness of a professional technician. Excellent work, buddy. Can you help Lila document the final status readings while I finish the backup power connections? Victoria found herself watching her daughter work alongside Ethan with a sense of recognition that was both startling and deeply moving. This was what Lila had been asking for, not a stepfather who would fit into their existing life, but a family dynamic that would expand their world and create new possibilities for connection and growth. "Mom," Lila said, appearing at her side as the emergency work was winding down. "Can I talk to you privately for a minute?" They stepped into an empty conference room, and Victoria could see that her daughter was processing something significant. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I've made my decision about the dad thing," Lila said without preamble. Victoria felt her heart rate accelerate. "Already I thought you wanted more time to evaluate everyone." "I did want more time, and I got it. Today showed me everything I needed to know." "What do you mean?" Lila took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts with the careful precision Victoria had come to recognize as her daughter's approach to important decisions. "All the other men were really nice when they were trying to impress us. They had good answers to my questions, and they seemed like they would be good dads. But today was different because Daniel wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just solving problems and taking care of people, including us, because that's who he is." Victoria waited, sensing that Lila wasn't finished. And Ethan wasn't trying to be the perfect kid to make his dad look good. He was just being himself, and Daniel was just being a dad. A really good dad who trusts his son to help with important things and who teaches him how to be useful when other people need help. "So you're saying..." "I'm saying I want Daniel to be my dad, and I want Ethan to be my brother. Not because they're perfect, but because they're real. And because when I'm with them, I feel like I'm part of something that matters." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that her daughter had articulated something she herself had been feeling but hadn't been able to name. The connection she felt with Daniel wasn't based on his impressive qualifications or carefully prepared responses to her questions. It was based on witnessing his authentic character under pressure and seeing how naturally their families fit together. "Lila, are you sure this is a very important decision, and once we..." "Mom," Lila interrupted gently. "Are you sure? Because I think you're scared that choosing Daniel means choosing someone who doesn't look impressive to your business friends." The observation was so accurate that Victoria felt momentarily winded. Her daughter had identified the exact source of her hesitation, not doubt about Daniel's character or compatibility, but concern about how her professional colleagues would perceive her choice. "You're right," Victoria admitted. "I am worried about that. But why your business friends don't have to live with him? We do. And if he makes us happy and helps us be a better family, why does it matter what anyone else thinks?" Victoria looked at her 10-year-old daughter and realized that somewhere in the process of evaluating potential father figures, Lila had developed a wisdom about relationships that many adults never achieved. She understood that authentic compatibility mattered more than superficial impressions, and that family decisions should be based on genuine connection rather than external validation. "You're absolutely right," Victoria said, feeling a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying suddenly lift from her shoulders. "Should we go tell Daniel and Ethan?" When they returned to the basement level, they found Daniel and Ethan packing up their emergency equipment, while building management personnel conducted final inspections of the flood damage. The crisis had been successfully managed. The servers were running normally, and normal building operations would resume on Monday morning. "Daniel," Victoria said, "could we speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." "Ethan, can you finish loading the toolkit while I talk with Mrs. Hale and Lila?" "Actually," Lila interjected, "I think Ethan should hear this too, since it affects him as much as anyone." Daniel looked puzzled but gestured for his son to join their conversation. "Daniel," Victoria began, "what happened today showed us something important about who you are and how your family operates. The way you handled this emergency, the way you included Ethan in meaningful work, the way you thought about protecting not just my company, but everyone affected by the situation, it demonstrated the kind of character and judgment that we want in our family. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to hope to something that looked like carefully controlled emotion. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Lila announced with characteristic directness, "that I want you to be my dad, and I want Ethan to be my brother, if you want that too." The silence that followed was broken by Ethan's excited voice. "Really? Lila would be my sister, and we'd live in the same house and everything." "That would depend on what your dad thinks," Victoria said, looking at Daniel with a mixture of hope and nervousness. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him processing the magnitude of what was being offered. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I think," he said slowly, "that joining your family would be the greatest honor of my life. But I need you both to understand something important." "What?" Lila asked. "I don't have a lot of money, and I probably never will. I can't offer you expensive vacations or private schools or the kind of lifestyle you're accustomed to. What I can offer is my complete commitment to your happiness and well-being, and my promise that you'll always be my first priority." "Daniel," Victoria said gently, "if we wanted someone for their money, we would have chosen one of the other candidates. We're choosing you because you're the person we want to build a life with." The next few weeks passed in a blur of practical arrangements, media attention, and family bonding that felt both surreal and completely natural. Victoria's decision to choose Daniel over the more conventionally impressive candidates generated significant public interest, with opinions ranging from admiration for her authenticity to criticism of her judgment. The business implications were more complicated. Richard Evans and his allies on the board used the continued media attention as evidence that Victoria's personal choices were undermining the company's professional image. They called for another emergency meeting this time, with a formal motion of no confidence already prepared. "Victoria," Patricia Newman said, as the board convened for what felt like a final showdown, "I want you to know that this isn't personal. We all respect your abilities and your contributions to the company. But the board has a responsibility to consider whether ongoing publicity about your personal life is compatible with effective corporate leadership." "I understand your position," Victoria replied, surprising the board members with her calm acceptance. "And I've given considerable thought to the relationship between my personal choices and my professional responsibilities." Richard leaned forward with barely concealed anticipation. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "I've concluded that I don't want to lead a company where being an authentic person and prioritizing my family's well-being are seen as disqualifications for leadership." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and Victoria could see several board members reconsidering their positions as they processed the implications. "Are you threatening to resign?" James Morrison asked. "I'm suggesting that perhaps we need to examine whether this board's values are aligned with the kind of company we want to be. Our employees are watching how we handle this situation, and they're learning what we actually prioritize when personal and professional considerations come into conflict." Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if we send the message that successful leadership requires sacrificing family relationships and authentic personal choices, we're creating a culture where people feel they have to choose between being good parents and being good employees. Is that really the legacy we want for this company?" Victoria looked around the table at faces that were now showing uncertainty rather than conviction. "Furthermore, I think you're dramatically underestimating the positive impact this story has had on our public image. Yes, there's been criticism from people who think I should have made a more conventional choice, but there's also been overwhelming support from employees, customers, and community members who see our company as one that values authenticity and family relationships. She activated the conference room's display screen showing a compilation of social media posts, news articles, and employee feedback that Rachel had compiled over the past week. Our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. Customer loyalty metrics have improved significantly, and recruitment for senior positions has increased by 40% because professionals see us as a company where they won't have to sacrifice their personal values for career advancement. Richard's face was growing red with frustration. Victoria, you're cherry-picking data to support a predetermined conclusion. I'm presenting evidence that challenges your assumption that authenticity and effective leadership are incompatible, Victoria interrupted. The question is whether this board is willing to evolve its thinking or whether it's committed to maintaining outdated ideas about what successful leadership looks like. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Victoria had expected, but decisive enough to settle the matter. Patricia James and 3 other board members voted to maintain confidence in Victoria's leadership, while Richard and his 2 closest allies voted for her removal. "This isn't over," Richard said as the meeting concluded. "If this situation continues to generate controversy or impact our stock performance, I will revisit this issue." "Richard," Victoria replied calmly, "if you spend more energy trying to undermine my leadership than supporting the company's success, the board will eventually notice. I'd suggest focusing on your actual responsibilities rather than your personal disapproval of my family choices." 3 months later, Victoria and Daniel were married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, with Lila serving as maid of honor and Ethan as best man. The wedding was intimate and joyful, focused on the joining of 2 families, rather than the spectacle that might have accompanied a more conventional corporate merger. The other candidates had all handled the conclusion of the selection process with grace and dignity. Dr. Wellington sent a thoughtful note expressing his admiration for both the process and the outcome. Marcus Chen attended the wedding as a friend, having developed a genuine appreciation for the family's unconventional approach to important decisions. David Rodriguez catered the reception at cost, declaring it an honor to provide food for a celebration of authentic love. And Christopher Blake established a scholarship fund in Lila's name for young women pursuing careers in science and technology. But the most meaningful moment came 6 months after the wedding, when Lila came home from school with news that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. "Mom, Dad," she announced, using the titles that had become natural and comfortable for all of them. "I've been thinking about next year's science fair project, and I want to do something about family structures and social expectations." "What kind of something?" Daniel asked, looking up from the homework he was helping Ethan complete. "I want to study whether kids from unconventional families perform better or worse than kids from traditional families on measures of happiness, academic achievement, and social development." Victoria and Daniel exchanged a look of amused pride. Their daughter's analytical approach to life hadn't changed, but she was now applying it to questions that could help other families navigate similar challenges. "That sounds like a very important research project," Victoria said. "What's your hypothesis?" "I think that kids from families where the adults made conscious, thoughtful choices about their relationships will do better than kids from families where the adults just followed social expectations without really thinking about what would work best for their specific situation." "And how would you test that hypothesis?" Daniel asked. "Surveys, interviews, academic performance data, maybe some psychological assessments. I'd want to compare different types of families, traditional nuclear families, single-parent families, blended families like ours, families with same-sex parents, families where kids are raised by grandparents or other relatives. And Victoria realized that her daughter was proposing research that could have genuine academic and social value, the kind of project that might influence how people think about family structures and child development. Lila, that's a brilliant idea. Have you thought about whether you might want to continue this kind of research as you get older? Maybe. I think understanding how families work and what makes kids happy could be really important for helping people make better decisions about their lives. That evening, as Victoria and Daniel sat together in their living room, watching Lila and Ethan work on a Lego construction project that had somehow expanded to cover most of the floor, Victoria reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that evening at the charity gala. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Lila hadn't made that announcement?" she asked. "Sometimes," Daniel replied, reaching over to take her hand. "But mostly, I'm just grateful that she was brave enough to ask for what she needed. Even though it created such a media circus and put all of us under so much public scrutiny, especially because of that. If we had met under normal circumstances, you might never have seen who I really was under pressure. And I might never have understood how strong and principled you are when people try to make you choose between your values and your career." Victoria squeezed his hand, thinking about how much wisdom there was in his observation. The public nature of their courtship had been uncomfortable and sometimes overwhelming, but it had also stripped away the pretenses and careful image management that might have prevented them from truly knowing each other. "Mom, Dad," Lila called from across the room. "We need help moving this to the dining room table so we can finish it tomorrow. It's gotten too big for the floor." "What exactly are you building?" Victoria asked, looking at the elaborate structure that seemed to incorporate elements of architecture, engineering, and pure imagination. "It's a community center," Ethan explained excitedly, "with places for families to eat together, and classrooms where kids can learn new things, and offices where parents can work, and playgrounds where everyone can have fun. It's designed so that different types of families can all find spaces where they feel comfortable," Lila added, "because we learned that families work better when they have support from other families who understand them." Victoria and Daniel looked at each other over their children's heads, both recognizing the profound insight embedded in their joint project. Without any prompting from adults, Lila and Ethan had conceptualized a vision of community that honored different family structures while bringing them together around shared values. As they carefully moved the elaborate Lego construction to a more stable location, Victoria realized that her daughter's bold request for a father had created something far more significant than just a new family configuration. It had challenged social assumptions, sparked important conversations about authenticity and leadership, and demonstrated that sometimes the most unconventional choices lead to the most meaningful outcomes. The story that had begun with a 10-year-old's public announcement had evolved into a testament to the power of listening to children, the importance of authentic relationships, and the courage required to prioritize love over social expectations. And as Victoria tucked both children into their beds that night, Lila in her own room, and Ethan in the bedroom that had once been Victoria's home office, she felt a sense of completeness that had nothing to do with conforming to traditional family structures and everything to do with creating a life built on genuine connection, mutual respect, and the kind of love that emerges when people are brave enough to be exactly who they are. The last thing Victoria heard before falling asleep was the sound of Daniel reading quietly to Ethan, his voice carrying through the walls of their home with the steady reassurance of someone who had found his place in the world. And in that moment, she knew that all the challenges they had faced, the The media attention, the board conflicts, the social criticism had been worth it for the simple joy of being part of a family where everyone was chosen, valued, and loved for exactly who they were.